Satisfying your sweet tooth on the trail doesn't automatically mean going to the retail store and buying a bunch of junk food with mystery ingredients. By making your own sweets, you can control the ingredients that go into them and enjoy them every bit as much as the junk food that you'd buy in the store. And they'll really help you with pounding out those miles every day on the trail. On this episode of Vegan Packer, caramel peanut butter tofu candy. That's right, tofu, that is so delicious you'll never know it's in there. Here are the ingredients, equipment, and steps to making this delicious treat that you're going to love having time after time on the trail. To make 36 pieces of the peanut butter caramel tofu jerky, we'll need 3 14-ounce boxes of firm or extra firm tofu, 8 14-ounce cans of coconut milk that's unsweetened, 8 cups of dark brown sugar, 10 teaspoons of vanilla extract. Use the good stuff, you're worth it. And we'll need a half a teaspoon, more or less to taste, of sea salt and 2 30-ounce jars of dehydrated peanut butter. Place the cans of coconut milk in the refrigerator at least 8 to 12 hours before starting the rest of the recipe. We'll get back to that in a minute. Other than standard cookware, the only specialized equipment that you'll need for this dish is a dehydrator and a candy thermometer, which is just a specialized thermometer that can clip onto the side of a saucepan to measure the temperature of the ingredients that you're cooking. The first step in preparing this dish is going to be to cut and dry our tofu out because it's so filled with moisture when it comes out of the box initially. This is done by a method that's called pressing. Now, if you're lucky enough to have a tofu press, which is a special device that actually squeezes the tofu like a sponge and wrings the moisture out from it, that's great and really simple. But if you don't have one, there's a really easy method that we can use to achieve the same results. Start by taking your baking sheet, broiler pan, or other rimmed container and line it with several layers of paper towels. Here I probably have about 10 that are going to be my liner. We're going to use this to soak up the water from the tofu like a sponge. Cut open your packages of tofu. Remove the tofu from the package. Place the tofu on its side. And then what we're going to be doing is cutting along the thickness. In other words, we're going to be making each piece so that it is half the thickness that it started off. And we'll be cutting through it carefully with a sharp knife. You don't want to do this too quickly because if you do, you'll end up smashing the tofu or crushing it instead of cutting it. Place your tofu on the lined sheet pan and try to make it so that it's equally distributed in order to allow the paper towels to soak it up the best way possible. Take a second tray with a heavy pot that you're going to place on top for additional weight and place it on top of that, and that will give it some extra force. In order to give it a little bit more weight, we're even going to add some water to this. Now you can't go and fill a 100-pound bucket and put it on top of it because you will end up smashing your tofu, but a little bit of extra weight is not going to hurt. So just make sure that you do it in a measured way and you should be fine. This first pressing is going to take at least a half hour or so. So this is going to give us a chance to get started with the next step in the process, and that's making the caramel for the tofu. As you've seen when I've used coconut milk in other recipes before, I've taken the cans and placed them in my refrigerator overnight for about 8 to 12 hours so that the cream can float to the top and solidify, making it really easy to scoop out. The cream is what we're going to be using for this recipe. There's the cream on the top. So now we're just going to carefully scoop that off and drain off the liquid from the bottom of the can. And there you can start to see in the bottom the liquid that's moving around. That's exactly what we're going to drain off. Next, we're going to add the cream to a saucepan. And then we're going to bring it up to a light rolling boil at about 200 to 225 degrees. I've added the candy thermometer and the coconut milk is now starting to get in the temperature range. So it's time to add the brown sugar. So we're going to add this. Be careful because it will splatter a little bit. And then what we'll do is we'll whisk it in, add a little bit more, and continue on until the entire batch is mixed together. Now this is going to drop your temperature, and then we're going to allow it to come back up to the proper range of, again, 200 to 220, no more than 225 max. We're just going to let it gently take its time and come back up to temperature. If you do this in a hurry, you're going to end up burning this, and what will happen is you'll have a burnt mess on the bottom of the pan and it will just never come out right. So this is something that takes a little bit of time and you want to do it carefully. All right, now we're back up in the zone and we want this to continue for another at least 20 to 25 minutes. Okay, we're in the home stretch here. And let's take a look so you can see how this is supposed to go. You see, it looks like it's a cauldron or something in the bottom. It is boiling, but it's a rolling, bubbly kind of a thing, not really massively out of control. It's much thicker than it was before. You can see that it's taken on the brown texture. I have the temperature right in the zone. And I've just got a few seconds left until my timer's going to go off here saying that this is done. But I'll give it a couple more minutes and I'll let it thicken just a little bit more. And once you take it, and there's the timer, once you take it off of the stove and it cools down, it will thicken more than it shows while you're in the middle of cooking it. The other thing is that as the time goes by and it does thicken and some of the liquid starts to evaporate, you'll need to slowly be lowering the temperature on the stove to keep it in that same range. Otherwise, as there's less liquid, it will heat up more and more and it will rise above the temperature that you're looking for. But this is definitely looking like it is just about ready. So we'll give it another minute or two and then I'll be ready to add the last of the ingredients. This is exactly where I want it to be. It's finishing up. You can see it's got a very, very slow rumbling kind of boil going on. It's got that beautiful color. It's gotten thickened up considerably from where it was when we first started off. So I think that this, I'm going to call it done. I'm going to reach over here, turn off my stove. I'm going to add my vanilla. I'm going to add the salt. I'm not going to put it all in. I'm going to put most of it in because I have made this before and I know how I like it. I'll give it a whisk. And then I'm going to just give it a little taste. When you do this, be very careful because it is hot. So make sure you cool it off like you would with some hot soup. Just take a little tiny bit in a teaspoon and give it a try and see what you think. And if it needs some more, you can add some more salt to whatever your personal taste is. I knew I should have made more because I'm going to end out eating a bunch of this before I even start to use it for the next step. But I guess we'll say that this turned out okay. While we're letting our caramel cool back to room temperature, it's time to get back to the tofu. After about a half hour of pressing, the paper towels that we've been using have become saturated with water. It's time to remove the pot and tray, take off the pieces of tofu, replace the paper towels, and when you replace the tofu back onto the tray, turn it over so that the opposite side is on the paper towels, allowing that side to receive the moisture reduction. Replace the tray and the weighted pot on top of the tofu. Give it about another half hour and then check the paper towels and see how moisture laden they are. You may have to repeat this process a few times before the tofu is dry enough that you really won't be getting much more absorption in the paper towels. That's exactly what you're shooting for before you're ready to move on to the next step. Take each of the tofu slabs that we've already cut in half before, and then this time we're going to cut it in half from side to side, and then we're going to cut each one of those halves into 3 equal size fingers. And they'll finish up more or less squared going around. After letting the mix cool down to room temperature, take a look and you can see the texture is much different. Look at how this flows. Exactly like you'd like caramel to come out. So this is what your goal is. You want it to come out just like this in the end. Take your caramel that you've already made and is at room temperature. Get another bowl, a ladle or some kind of scooping device, and gather your tofu fingers. What we're going to do is we're going to take some of the tofu and some of the caramel, and we're going to work them together and put them in the bowl until we have everything completely saturated in the caramel. So while you're putting the tofu pieces in, make sure that you separate them if they're stuck together so that everything gets a chance to get some coverage. We're going to make this into a marinade. So just add a little bit at a time. It'll spread out on its own. If you've had it out for a while and you're noticing that it's starting to get kind of solidified with your caramel, you can always put it in the microwave for a minute or so and warm it back up, and that will get rid of the crystallization. Cover your bowl and place your tofu in the refrigerator for at least 1, even up to 3 days is better. The longer that you leave it in, the more that it will pick up that sweet, delicious candy flavor. Also, during that time, you'll want every once in a while, let's say once a day or so, to rotate the pieces around and make sure that they're covered again, because some of them will float to the surface and not be completely covered during that time. After 2 or 3 days of marination and rotating the tofu in the refrigerator, it's time to take it out and move to the next step, which is going to be the dehydration process. At this point, your caramel mixture is going to be pretty solid, so the best thing to do is to let it sit out for a few hours, or if you're in a hurry, you can always put it in the microwave for a couple of minutes just to soften it up so it'll be easy to work with. But that is going to be key for our next step. Time to get your hands dirty. We're going to take each piece of the tofu and with its coating, place it onto the dehydrator tray. Now you don't necessarily want it to be swimming so that it leaves a huge puddle of the caramel on the tray, because that's just going to make it a little more cumbersome when it comes to flipping it. It'll act like a glue and make it stick. But it doesn't have to be perfect either, so just get it on there and keep working your way around. Place your coated tofu into the dehydrator and set it for between, let's say, 135 to 140 degrees for about 12 hours. But you're going to need to check on it about every 4 to 6 hours, and you're going to want to flip the tofu over to get all the sides evenly exposed. As hard as it is not to eat the remaining caramel, we're going to need to use that to recoat the tofu that's in the dehydrator. So place it in a container and put it in your refrigerator, and we'll use it again later. After the first go in the dehydrator, you can see that a lot of the caramel has dripped off of the tofu into the tray, and that's why we're going to give it a rotation and a second coating and place it back in the dehydrator for a few more hours. After a second round of about 4 hours through the dehydrator, and then allowing the tofu to rest for about 3 or 4 hours, the tofu should have a firm but spongy kind of a feel to it when you squeeze it. It should still be flexible, but it should be pretty firm at this point. I'm not sure how well it shows up on the camera, but you can also see on the outside, it's now starting to look like it has a crystallized candy coating on it. And that's exactly what we want before we move on to the next step. The last sequence involves dipping it in the caramel, coating it in the peanut butter powder, and then repeating it through the peanut butter powder a few times after allowing it to rest in between and absorb the caramel. So we'll just take this, give it a quick dip. And we're going to roll it in the powder. And it's going to make a mess, but that's okay. Just let it kind of soak up as much of the powder as it will take. Pack it in a little bit more densely. And you can move on to the next piece. I'm not sure if this shows well on video or not, but on the left is a batch that I rolled through the peanut butter probably about an hour and a half ago, and on the right is one that I probably finished maybe, let's say, 20 minutes ago. If you look on the one on the left, you can see definite places where it's darkened, and that's because the caramel has soaked through. This is why you want to let it rest before re-rolling it into the peanut butter again, so that the caramel can be absorbed by the peanut butter, and then when you go to roll it the second time, the peanut butter will again absorb all that caramel, so that the final product will be dry instead of sticky. After letting the candy rest overnight, you can really see how the bottom 2 rows here have the caramel really peeking through where it has been absorbed by the peanut butter. And then the very top 2 rows, I have just rolled for the third and final time through the peanut butter. Now the outside resembles that of a powdered donut kind of a thing, except instead of sugar, we have the peanut butter. After the final application of the peanut butter powder to your treats, they're ready for packaging and to bring them on the trail. If you won't be using them right away, however, I'm going to suggest that you place them in the freezer, because my experience has been that they'll last for about 3 weeks to maybe a month, depending upon the environment, before they'll start to spoil. We've gone through the equipment, ingredients, and cooking procedures for preparing your trail candy. Really, the only thing that you need to do to make sure that this turns out perfectly every time is to just keep that caramel right in that safe temperature zone that we discussed, and your trail candy will come out so delicious that you'll love to have it time after time. I'm going to have a little sample strictly in the interest of culinary science and to give you an idea of how this batch came out. It's like a peanut butter powdered donut on the outside, and then the tofu is like a toothy, al dente kind of a thicker pasta kind of a texture in your mouth. It's hard to explain. And then the caramel flavor comes through and sweetens it up. I just love these. I have them every night for my dessert, but you can have them as your trail snack or whenever. These are so good, you'll enjoy having them even when you're not on the trail. And that much I promise. See you next time.